How's it going, guys? Today I'm going to give you a video about a little bit of a tour of the shop I work in at my parents' place. When you watch it, you'll notice that the place is a gigantic mess. And while I am a naturally messy person and leave a disaster in my wake wherever I go, this particular situation is a little different because we're in the middle of a remodel, so typically it wouldn't be quite as messy. Usually it would just be my stuff all over the place, not a bunch of clutter in the back. So I apologize for that. I feel a little self-conscious about it, but you know, I wanted to make these videos, and the remodel's not done yet, so we have nowhere to put all of the stuff. So enjoy, and yeah, here we go. Morning, everybody. Today I'm going to take a little time to give you a tour of the shop I work in. This is a little chunk of my dad's shop. It's actually an ever-expanding chunk of my dad's shop that he keeps reminding me about. But just wanted to walk you around it, since many of the videos I'm going to create for our online class are probably going to be based in here. Just kind of show you what I work with and some of the advantages and disadvantages it has over the school shop. And yeah, we'll get right to it. Just know that my setup is definitely not like a student-friendly setup. The school, we've put a lot of time into making sure that machines are set up in like the safest way possible. And then some of the stuff that you're gonna see here is not the best example of that whatsoever. So my table saw, a little bit of a death trap, and some of this other stuff is like not how I would like it to be in an educational setting, but it works for me because I've been doing it for a long time. So, you know, take that stuff to mind when you're watching this, and just know that like in our school shop, things are gonna be running a little bit differently. Start over here with the planer. I've got a Grizzly planer with a helical head. That's one thing that I like a little bit more than the school setup. Our planer is a really good one at the school, but the cutting head on this is similar to the joiner. In fact, I have it on the joiner too, and I can just show you real quick. Has this helical system where the cutters come in at an angle, and that's an advantage to a woodworker because you're shearing instead of just like chopping straight into something. So the cut quality with this planer is higher than the school's planer, even though the school's planer is kind of like a more powerful, fancier machine than this one. Next, we'll come over to the joiner. My joiner is not as nice as the school's, and if I could have the school's in this shop, that would be just great, because you guys are lucky to get to run a really nice piece of equipment. Mine does have, like I just mentioned, with the planer bit, it does have the helical cutter, but it's only a 6-inch wide joiner, whereas the school's has an 8-inch wide bed. And every time I move the fence on this, I have to re-square it, just because it's not like a really high quality machine. But if you set it up properly, it does a great job, so I'm not really complaining. Just kind of comparing. Over here, we've got my router set up. I have several routers. This guy is my big beast. It's like a 2.5 or something like that horsepower router. It just like, it dominates stuff. It's just super useful. And pull it out here so we can take a look. So sometimes I'll take it out of the table and run it by hand. It's got a special plate that you can toss on to make that a little bit easier on yourself. It's got this guy right here. So instead of having this inset plate for doing table routing, you can simply put this in, and it's a little bit easier to manage by hand. Although, to be honest, I typically just use the big square plate when I'm doing handwork on it. If you remember back from when we watched the bandsaw video, I talked about a 14-inch bandsaw being the most standard type of bandsaw that you're going to really run into in the wild. And mine is exactly that. It's an old 14-inch bandsaw. It's pretty underpowered. It's only got like a 3/4 horse motor, but it does the job. If you take it slow on big stuff, it'll cut through just about anything. And yeah, someday I'd like to upgrade to something a little bit more big, or a little bit bigger and more powerful. But for now, I got it for free from a friend, and I kind of tuned it up, and it works real well. So again, can't complain. All right, here we are at the table saw. I built this outfeed table for it. It's really handy because I built it so that it's dead flat. So it's a great reference surface for pieces of furniture like this one that has a little ways to go as far as being totally flattened out, but that's okay. So I just wanted to show you one of the things I consider most dangerous about this setup, besides the fact that it needs to be lubricated, is that there's no blade guard and there's no riving knife. It is just an exposed table saw blade, which is not ideal. This is an older machine. I've actually looked up trying to find some of these parts, and they're just really hard to come by. I could custom make them, but it just hasn't been a priority. Probably should be. The one advantage of this thing is that it's incredibly underpowered, so it's unlikely to kick back on you. It tends to just pinch. Here's my crosscut sled that I use, and my fence is a really nice, accurate one, even though this machine is a little bit old and a tiny bit scary. Wouldn't want it to be in the school shop, but it does just fine for me, and it cuts through everything I need it to cut through. All right, here's a little walkthrough of the shop. Joiner, planer, kind of bring your big items in here to get them milled up, and you walk into the rest of it. Bandsaw, table saw, and you'll notice that my workbench is super close to the table saw, and it's also reasonably close to the bandsaw as well. And I like that because that means everything is in arm's reach for me. One frustration I have when I'm working at the school by myself is that everything is really far apart, and that's for a reason, because there's a lot of people that are going to be using the shop at one time, you know, like an entire class of kids, and so it makes sense to have things spread out so that everyone has a little bit of room. But here it's typically just me, or maybe me and my dad, or me and my brother, and so for me, I want to have everything as close as possible, within reason, so that I can really just get a lot of work done and be as efficient as possible. Over here I've got my clamp rack. It's a nice clamp rack, but it could always have more clamps. Every woodworker's could. You got drills and measuring items and kind of bits and bobs back here. Got a hollow chisel mortiser. We haven't used the one in the shop this year. Hopefully we get the chance to before the end of the year. But if you did like that table project, if you took my class last year, you're familiar with that machine. Here I have my Festool domino cutter. It's a pretty fancy tool that I spent far too much money on, but it's really, really handy and an industry standard kind of a machine that I'll be showing you how it works here before too long. Big old tool panel, planes, chisels, screwdrivers, countersinks, Japanese hand saws, push sticks, blades, you get the idea. Over here, unorganized drawer of fasteners, miscellaneous table saw items, and wax. That's really most of what's going on here. You'll see that I've got a bunch of old jigs and things. If you put the time into making a jig or some sort of contraption to help you build something, you keep it. You keep it. You never know if you're going to need it again. For example, these guys are the legs for this dude that I got on the table over here. This kind of mid-century modern tabletop. It's going to have a glass tabletop on the top there. You also notice got a taper jig up here. Looks a little bit different than the school shops, but you get the idea. If you've built the footstool project, you probably cut a taper on the legs with a jig similar to that. And this guy over here, you'll notice I don't have a miter saw that's like readily available. So that is a 45-degree jig that I use for picture frames, or really anything that needs a 45-degree miter. I would love to have a miter saw. I just don't have a ton of room and bench space, so kind of do what we can out here. This video may come out first, but if you've watched this one and you watched the one about lumber selection and milling, you may be asking yourself, does Mr. Pollock wear the exact same thing every single day when we're not in school? And the answer is yes, I am a dirtbag. But I also bathe regularly and brush my teeth. You should too. Hopefully this shop tour video gives you a little bit more insight into the space that I work in and makes you think a little bit about you know, different spaces that you might find yourself working in someday. Our setup at the school is really perfect for what we do with a large group of people. Hopefully my shop gives you an idea of like how you might want to set something up if you're just going to work by yourself or with a smaller group. Yeah, that's all.